Order of the Wicked, Chapter 3. As soon as Lonadel heard the bell sound for dinner that night, she ran out of her room and into the long, low-lit stone corridor outside. "It'll find you," Melinda had said. What in Oz was that supposed to mean? She looked both ways down the corridor, half expecting sweet-faced old Gert to appear out of nowhere and tell her she'd solved some key riddle before leading her to the dining hall. But the hallway was as empty as always. Clear veins of crystal ran through the rough-hewn stone and glowed with an otherworldly light, no matter what time of day. The floor was crowded with a rug made from a fur of some animal she didn't recognize, tawny orange-gold with zigzagging black stripes. She knew the passageway to the left led to the big white cavern where she trained alone with Nox, and beyond that, the healing pool. So she turned to the right and started walking, and suddenly she wasn't alone. "Melindra told you," said a familiar voice, and Lonadel jumped. Nox had appeared out of nowhere. For a second she debated the value of pretending not to know what he was talking about, but she decided against it. "Were you ever going to?" Nox looked at her with his usual infuriating, inscrutable expression. "You have to learn to take initiative," he said. "You have innate skill, Lonadel, and I don't doubt your motivation, but you're too afraid to take risks." "Does everything have to be about training? Can't you just tell me where the dining hall is instead of letting me sit alone in my room for weeks thinking I'm the only person here?" He stopped short and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look in his eye. His thick, dark hair was wild. This close, his familiar sandalwood scent was almost overpowering. It was as if the rich smell emanated from his skin. "This isn't a joke, Lonadel," he said. "The Order is the only hope Oz has of stopping Dorothy before she goes too far. Every one of us has to be ready at all time. So yes, everything has to be about training." His voice dripped with disdain, and he repeated his words. Not for the first time, fury flooded through her as Nox needled her. "Fine," she snarled suddenly, ducking away from his grip and into a fighting crouch he taught her. For the first time since she'd arrived in the caverns, Nox was caught off guard, and when she threw the hardest, fiercest punch she ever mustered in her short life, it connected solidly with his chin, with a resounding, incredibly satisfying crack. Nox reeled backward, slamming into the corridor's walls, and she was already ready for him as he brought his own fist up a second too late. She whirled into a roundhouse kick, sweeping his feet out of beneath him, and when he crashed to the floor with a startled oof, she was already on top of him, her forearm pinning him to the ground by his throat as she straddled his chest. For a second, she saw a flash of something in his eyes that almost looked like respect, and then a huge, invisible hand was squeezing the life out of her, pulling her off Nox and pinning her up against the wall, where she'd thrown him seconds later. She could feel its might crushing her ribs, pushing the breath out of her chest until she saw stars, and the edges of her vision grew dim, and she refused to stop struggling. "You cheated! Used magic!" she wheezed, but the invisible hand only gripped her more tightly. "Use it!" someone was yelling in her ear. "Use your anger, Lonadel!" Something flared to life inside of her. The teeniest flicker of light kindled by the burning rage in her heart. She could almost see it. A finger flame that was just the tip of a roaring fire. "That's it!" Nox yelled, right before she passed out. When she opened her eyes, a huge, whisker-sprouting wart surrounded by a sea of wrinkles dominated her entire field of vision. She shrieked, and the wart moved backward, resolving into a wizened ancient features of Mombi. Lonadel had little contact with the serene witch, who seemed to be more or less the head of the Order, and what contact she had mostly consisted of the old woman barking orders. She didn't look any happier or kinder now. "What did you do to her? Hit her over the head?" Mombi grumbled. Nox was standing next to her, looking almost sheepish. "I just thought she needed some... She was almost there." "Magic is my subject," Mombi snapped, poking a stubby finger into Nox's muscular chest. Lonadel couldn't help a feeling of smug satisfaction as Nox's pleading expression, so he made mistakes after all. "She was so close," Nox said, some fire returning to his voice as he met the old witch's gaze. "You need to push the trainees harder if you want to see results. We're at war, Mombi." "You don't think I need to be reminded of that by you?" the witch snarled. "We need to push the trainees, yes. We don't need to suffocate them." She gestured violently toward Lonadel. "You could have killed her, Nox." "We're all going to get killed if we're not strong enough," Nox said coldly. Mombi made a disgusted noise and turned away, stomping off toward the corridor. "No magic," she shouted over her shoulder. "That's my job, Nox, and don't forget it again." Nox watched her go, his expression unreadable, and then sighed and extended a hand to Lonadel. "Sorry," he said quietly. She ignored his outstretched hand, and getting to her feet without his help. She'd been about to yell at him, too fired up by what had happened, but his unexpected apology stopped the words in her mouth. Nox never apologized. For anything. "You were right," she said, and the words surprising her as she said them. Nox raised an eyebrow. "I could feel something happening. Was that magic?" "Yeah," he said, looking at her thoughtfully. "It was. I wasn't sure if you had it in you, to be honest." "How does this stuff even work? How can you tell?" "Oz's magic is, well, it's complicated to say the least. There's a lot about it that we just don't understand. For a long time it seemed like the only witches could use magic. That's what everyone assumed anyway, but all that went out the window with the wizard. I thought Dorothy proved his power was fake back in the day. It was, and it wasn't. All that stuff with the giant talking head, yeah, that was just cheap tricks and illusions, but the gifts he gave the Scarecrow and the Lion and the Woodman was real enough. Plus, there's the matter of how he got to Oz in the first place. As far as we know, no one can cross over from the other place without magic. That's a lot we don't know about the wizard." "A lot we didn't know, you mean," Lonadel said. "He's dead, right?" Nox shook his head. "Nobody knows. There are rumors." He scowled in frustration. "There are always rumors, if he is still alive. He could be a powerful ally, or a powerful enemy, or just powerful. The wizard has always been famous for putting his own interests first. But until we figure out what's going on with Ozma, he might be able to rule in her stead. At least he was peaceful, which is a lot more than we can say for Dorothy." Lonadel's eyes widened. "You're trying to put the wizard back on the throne?" "Nobody knows the entire plan," Nox said severely, as if she'd said something she shouldn't have, even though he was the one who'd brought the wizard up in the first place. "That way, if you're captured—" He didn't have to finish, repeating what Melinda said back in the healing pool. Lonadel had seen what Dorothy's minions were capable of. He had no desire to be anywhere near the clutches with information they wanted to get out of her. "Anyway," he added less sharply, "everything in Oz is different now. I have magic." He flexed his fingers. "Melindra, Holly, and Larkin have magic. There are others. They won't tell you the full truth." A note of bitterness entered his voice. "But I don't think even Gert and Mombi fully understand what's happening with Oz's magic right now. I'm sure they'd loved it best if they were the special ones. Keep the rest of us in line, that kind of thing." He was pretending he was joking, but she wasn't fooled. There was something dark and unhappy underneath his light words, some old deep wound. She remembered what Melinda had said about Mombi raising him. He's more witch than a boy. And if that was true, and Mombi wasn't letting him in the Order's directions, that had to hurt. "And I have magic, I guess," she finished. "I had a feeling. But Mombi was right. She should have been the one to guide you to find your power, to learn to control first. Magic in the hands of someone who doesn't know what she's doing can be incredibly dangerous. That's why I shouldn't have pushed you as hard as I did. I triggered your power, sure, but, like Mombi said, I could have really hurt you." He sighed again, and pushed his dark hair out of his cool gray eyes. He trailed off, his gaze distant. "Like you said, we're at war," she supplied. "You can't afford to be soft. And anyway, it worked. If it makes me stronger, I don't care what you do." She hadn't realized how true that was until she said it out loud. How little she cared about her own life. If training killed her, so be it. If she wasn't strong enough to avenge her family, she'd just join them. "You mean that, don't you?" He didn't sound surprised. She didn't have to answer. She knew he didn't see it in her eyes. The fire was still burning, and next time she was going to learn how to use it. "Come on," he said, putting one hand briefly on her shoulder. "It's about time someone showed you the dining hall."